Well, the continued recession is leading some economists to consider the need for a second stimulus package. Today in Singapore, Laura Tyson, an economic advisor to the president, had this to say about another stimulus plan.
We're in a situation where the economic outlook is very uncertain. The risks are all on the downside. We look like the economy is weaker than expected. Why not begin to think about over the next several months whether we need a stimulus package and what it should include, so we're ready as we get more information.
But as you would guess, not all economists agree. Joining us right now with his views on the economy and the Federal Reserve is John Taylor, economics professor at Stanford University. He's best known for the Taylor Rule, which gauges where the Fed funds rate should be given the rate of inflation and GDP growth. And he's co-editor of a new book, that is, The Road Ahead for the Fed. John, good to have you back on Bloomberg. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be here.
You know, I've got to start with what we're hearing from Laura Tyson, you know, a member of the president's economic team, the advisory board. She's saying that maybe the U.S. should consider another stimulus plan. What do you think?
No, I don't think it's a good idea at all. You know, quite frankly, it would be the third stimulus. We had the Stimulus Act in 2008. We had a Stimulus Act earlier this year. And they're not working, actually. It's not a big surprise, these one-time payments. Or the very slow delivery on infrastructure. So if you want to do something constructive, I'd say get the payments out sooner in the current package rather than think about another, which would just raise the deficit and raise other kinds of questions.
John, just have a few seconds before we have to take a break here. I mean, why don't you think it's coming out faster, all of that money? Just got a few seconds, 10 seconds here.
Yeah, it's a traditional problem with fiscal policy. It's hard to roll it out. There aren't that many shovel-ready projects, and that's really the problem right now.
All right, sit tight, John. We're going to come back and talk some more about this as well as the book that you've got out. We're taking a break. We're talking with John Taylor, author of The Road Ahead for the Fed. We're back in 2. All right, we're back at 14 minutes after, talking with John Taylor, economics professor at Stanford University. John, one thing I want to ask you about in terms of Laura Tyson, then we'll move on. She says she's speaking for herself, not the administration. You've been part of the White House inner economic circle before in '89 and '91. What do you think? Is the administration kind of putting out a trial balloon here?
They could be, quite frankly, because they work together, but I hope not. I hope they're not seriously thinking about this, because what they should be doing is making sure the one they've already got out there is working, rather than have a new one which will just increase the debt. So I hope it's not a trial balloon, but it could very well be.
Professor Taylor, it's Mark Crumpton with Carol. You know, the conversation the past few weeks has been about the Fed being this so-called super regulator, an uber regulator. But recently you were quoted in the Financial Times as saying that the proposals give too many new powers to the Fed and threaten to dilute its central role of conducting monetary policy. Do you still stand by that assessment?
Yes, I do. I think it's a real concern. The Federal Reserve has done well over many years, the 80s and 90s, of keeping inflation low and long expansions. More recently, I think it's gotten off track. It's one of the problems we've had. So giving it the focus on overall keeping inflation under control, keeping the economy stable is essential, and to give it more powers and additional things to do, I think, does dilute that very important responsibility.
Well, speaking of inflation, does the Fed still assume that inflation should run at 2%?
Well, that's what they say based on their longer-term forecasts. Of course, it's easier said than done in every aspect of monetary policy. Right now, some of the pressures for higher inflation are the large amount of debt that's being issued. Debt's going from 40% of GDP to 80%. Is going to be pressure on the Fed to finance that. Plus, their own balance sheet is still quite large and rising. So the pressures are in the other direction. We certainly hope that they continue with that goal, but I think a lot of political savvy people are worried about it.
Are you worried when it comes to things, you know, the inflation-deflation debate? Where do you sit on it, John?
Yeah, I'm more concerned about the inflation down the road. It's not something that's going to occur right away. Monetary policy works with a lag, but once it gets going, I think it's more like it was in the late 60s and 70s, where it started to rise, and then the Fed tightened and we had a recession, started to rise. That kind of thing is what I'm concerned about. And deflation just doesn't seem to have been the risk that a lot of people had suggested during the panic of last fall and early this year.
Professor Taylor, the upcoming G8 meeting in Italy, one of the things sure to be discussed is the dollar's role as the reserve currency. China had sent out some feelers earlier this year, even suggesting that maybe the dollar's time had come and gone. Where do you fall on that? Is that, first off, is that conversation warranted?
Well, of course, people like to raise questions like this in other countries about the dollar. I don't think it's a healthy thing to do for the world economy. But I think very much the questions about the dollar have to do with this excessive debt that we're issuing, the concerns I just mentioned about inflation. High inflation would obviously be bad for the dollar. So the more that we as a country and our policymakers can say how important it is to maintain the purchasing power of the currency, the better it will be. It's not a good idea that we have to go around the world asking other countries to buy our debt. Better for us to focus on good economic policies here, and I hope that's what President Obama emphasizes at the meeting.
Professor Taylor, less than a minute left, and something I noticed, I know you've got a new book coming out. It mentions that you are currently a member of the California Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. I got to ask you, I mean, what are you advising the governor in regards to really the financial crisis in that state? And again, I think we've got about 30, 40 seconds here.
Sure. Right now, there's really no choice but to get the spending under control and make the adjustments that the voters called for in these recent propositions. He's out there now telling particular people where the cuts have to be made. Hope the legislature moves along with that because it's very important. And then in the future to control the growth of spending, of course.
5 seconds. Does the federal government need to step in and provide some aid for California in your view? And is that likely if you think so?
No, I think they've made it very clear that you had the stimulus package and that's it.
All right.
I think that's the right position.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Professor Taylor, thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground and we appreciate it. Professor John Taylor, economics professor at Stanford University.